Um, so this talk is about a small exhibition that I actually had to resolve quite fast. A small exhibition because the space was actually small. This was an exhibition that in which I present my own work in a gallery in Sweden, and I wanted to share how this process went by. And so I would like to situate, actually, in my paper, in a couple of publications, a couple of critical texts that have recently been published. One of them in this German newspaper. This was by Ioma Mangold, and again, this is a critique to contemporary art related to note that usually the word is defined as moral, not ethics. So the aim is not only to break new aesthetic ground, but to put all publicly recognized identity groups in a picture. So that actually these efforts for being progressive, and one could define it as woke, it's actually limiting the freedom of art, no? And on the other hand, this text from Claire Bishop, quite an interesting text in which she does a critique to artistic research, and I'm talking as artistic research as this somewhat new form of approaching art and art studies, in which pretty much is being done a mapping from the realm of science or from the format of the sciences towards art, no? In what has to do with its studies, and I would say that she's basically doing a critique on the aesthetics used that is very much about showing the documentation, no? And that this is this by now as well, in her own opinion, this is also constraining, no? This freedom of art as well. So I would say that basically in contemporary or mostly Western inherited cultures, we tend to think everything out like binary opposites, no? So, for example, tradition is opposing of innovation. We can't really conceive innovation within the format of tradition, and then art is on the other side of science. And of course, by now, we're sort of trying to unite these two apparently opposite disciplines, and the same with culture and nature. It's true that by now many of the things are being questioned, but this has been how we've been dealing with disciplines, no? So I wanted to share this graph. It's something that we actually came up with in one of the workshops here in ISEA. And since I'm going to talk a bit about mutualism, I thought it was interesting to actually share something that we came up with working with others, no? So, of course, we can talk about this afterwards, but this is what we all came up with, no? It's sort of by now in the realm of arts and sciences, or the art plus science, and there will be included the art plus electronic art and technology, etc. And it's the idea is to sort of unite them to these by these different, what we could call not only but aesthetic bridges, no? And let's say towards the side of art, it has to do more with practices, identities, styles, traditions, in the sort of in between with the methods, and then the area that more refers to as science, techniques, classifications, data tools. And now we can see many of these really much intertwined. And this new art form would be found in between, no? But actually there is a common origin between, as we know, in between art, science, and technology, no? At first it was one. So I came up with this other diagram to sort of describe what's going on right now, in my opinion, no? And that it's actually for the artist science, and pretty much by now understood as technology, no? Not that it's the same, but usually, or by now, when we see artworks that fit in between this category of science and art, usually technology is it's very present and very obvious, and aesthetic sort of works around this. So it's as if the aesthetics of science have a hold on art by now, and it's we see very much this sort of aesthetics that has to do with sci-fi or with the lab or documents, no, or documentation, as Claire Bishop was pointing out. And so there's a prototype, you yourself, experiments in more science or the hard science, let's say. You can see test tubes, petri dishes, and in the between, more towards the social sciences, maybe display archives, text, and there is a proliferation of screens, digital software code. By now, all of this is very familiar, so we can talk about tradition. This has been seen already for more than 40 years, and still is being presented as new media. It's a quite curious phenomenon. It's something new, supposedly innovative, but yet it's quite old. One can think in a temporal framework. So for this exhibition, I thought about this common origin, and I thought about craft. So again, I'm approaching interdisciplinarity as an ecology of actions, objects, and meanings. No, so the show was called Symbiosis in English. This was actually Swedish, and the characteristic, the transdisciplinary condition of the show, it wasn't about the multimediality of the works themselves, but in the intentional implementation of an ecology of meanings. Once the pieces characteristically polysemic, that's it, that each one of them can have multiple interpretations or readings, are both developed and placed in the gallery relationally. So what I did was, in the gallery there's a dark room and a light room, and I actually split the works depending on the type of symbiotic relation that I was speaking of. So the lighter one had to do with the mutualistic relationships, and the darker one with the parasitic ones. So again, the works spread to various medias. I did painting as well, and actually the painting has a digital component. So as you can see, this is interactive. It's actually, I've used the lichens as sensor. And this is the parasitism room. So again, I'm doing this mapping or parallel between symbiosis and syncretism, no? And I came up with this neologism called syncreto, which means syncret, and this was a neologism that would describe a syncretic thing. And with this, I meant to draw a parallel between the symbiotic and syncretic processes, one in culture or within the social sciences, and one between among biology, or from biology or the natural sciences, no? And the idea is to present the actual art object as a syncret, as this product of various cultural expressions. So, in my opinion, all objects, probably since modern art, maybe from before, would be could be defined as syncretic. Now about this interactive installation. So if you see the different works, the reference to textile traditions, they are made with Usnea filipendula or Usnea cavernosa, which is a type of lichen that is found in Nordic forests or in Nordic areas. And it has a particular qualities, let's say, beyond the ones that I described there. The actual piece is an interactive biosynth, that it's alive. And all of these textiles are actually alive, and these artworks are alive. Since these, the lichens are part algae and part fungus, they have properties of both, but also emerging properties. So what happens is when they become humid, not only they change color, and this is quite an interesting thing to see, because as soon as I spray them or put water on them, they change from brown grayish to green in like maybe 20 seconds. So we could say they have inherent interactivity, let's say, or reactivity. But they also turn conductive. So what happens is that they turn into sensors themselves beyond just being a sort of clean air sensor, because these lichens only grow in clean air environments. And in that way, usually they are a marker of healthy forests. So the interesting thing here is that if it's dead, then the biosynth wouldn't work anymore. And that has some interesting implications I'll talk later. And then the second, most of the pieces we call syncreto, and I just put a number. So syncreto 1, 2, 3. And this one also references, I mean, I'm not going to go much, but I actually researched on the Kipo, which is a pre-Columbian device of Ande and Orji, that it's being used up to date, yet it's presented as exclusively archaeological remnant. Yet the tradition is alive. So that is one of the examples of the kipos that are being used up to date, and this is a notation device, so information is coded by using notes. And I did the same using the lichens, and I coded with notes as well the word yo or I. And the interesting thing is that I knew that when the lichens would continue being alive, they would grow, and the actual coding would be lost. So I coded in binary, with the notes, and that has happened. By now, these pieces are probably 8 months alive, and this also brings interesting implications. Has to do with the care of artworks, and this is the Syncreto 3. And actually, I realized that if I used a traditional textile tradition from my country of origin, which is Peru, that is commonly used for artisanry, for just selling these textiles to tourists, actually the lichens wouldn't be damaged. So I used this technique for making this textile, and it also has a coded following this kind of variable system, because it's something that I research as well, binary coding systems. As you see the dots, it actually says do or you, and this over time will disappear as well if the textile is being kept alive and it continues growing. And again, these are syncretic objects because I refer to various traditions. As you see before, the loom, it's a traditional Swedish loom, but yet the technique that I use is Peruvian. The same with this one. It actually, the technique is Peruvian, but it references the traditional, the wall behind. It's part of this falu röd hues from Sweden as well, from the Nordic countries, from where the lichens are from. And actually, the knot that you saw before, for me, I see it as a model of consciousness, as a knot of knots, let's say. So the idea is to question how we're valuing art objects. So the interesting thing about the syncretos, the one that include the lichens, is that they are of value as long as these are kept alive. Because the lichens need to have certain conditions to preserve their shape. Say, if it's too warm and humid, they actually turn black and they disintegrate. If it's too dry and they die, when they die, no? If it's too dry and they die that way, eventually they will preserve their shape, but not their qualities. They won't change color anymore. And in the case of the loom, that's even more clear, because they would just stop being conductive, and it won't be, the actual biosynth won't work anymore. So this fight against decay, I think it poses interesting questions to preservation of artworks as well. And it's something that I experience as well, because it requires, I need to be constantly aware of them and how they're being kept. And of course, changes in weather and the current climate change that we're experiencing is a threat to this. And this whole idea of working with lichens came up with from, I don't know if you've seen that there are these bunkers being sold so rich people would survive after the catastrophe that climate change implies. And it's quite interesting because it was given much importance to the art collection, but not to actual different life forms, let's say. So in a way, this was it was a way to sort of include these life forms that were risking extinction as an art, as an art work of value, or maybe value for them, and that way they could be preserved. So this is a parasitism room, and of course parasitism, it's a different way of interaction compared to mutualism, that, as the term implies, it implies two agents working together, and the relationship being beneficial for the both of them. But parasitism is not about this. It's actually one or both agents are damaged or maybe killed by this interaction. So what happens here is this is, let's see if I can play the video. Yes. So this video, I use a NERF, for the neural radiance field method, for reconstructing a sculpture that was in a public space in Stockholm, in Sweden, that had been, the people had ripped its arms after the recent Swedish election, in which the far right won. And as you can see, one of the arms is there, and the idea with this method was to sort of reconstruct what happened. But the arm that you see there is actually the left. So the right arm was taken away. And you can imagine if the sculpture was like this. If the right arm was taken, definitely what can breed something particular, especially because of the context in which this happened. Now, this sculpture had an interesting way. It was made, it was designed by me for another artist, and but then the public intervened it as well. So the idea again is to talk about this mutual creation, but in this case more related to violence, and to referencing these events that were prejudicial or damaging for the agents involved. So that was actually a graffiti that was next to an important art center in Stockholm, and I included below this arm that I placed a very explicit way. And note that the gallery owner is Jewish. He very much understood what I was doing, but this was a very extreme way to tackle the subject, what is going on in Sweden, no? Regarding politics. And again, because if one is allowed to interpret certain subjective narratives of events and artists, well, this is what I was interpreting out of this lost arm, so which I simply reprinted as I had the original 3D file. Basically, the idea of the show, apart from this mapping in between the process of symbiosis within the natural world and used in the natural sciences, and that of syncretism within the social sciences. Then I divided these up in these two rooms, one dark, one light, and probably conventionally associating light to a more positive outcome and darkness to more negative outcome. And that way I was try to be quite explicit and maybe some not that innovative, let's say. So the idea is to sort of question certain discourses that are quite going around, as well as doing a critique to our inclination to classification and this dual thinking, no? This binary essence. And again, this idea of classification or exact definition, it's not something that all human cultures share. Many cultures are quite comfortable with polysemia, no? With something having various meanings. I presented the show as framed within a ecology of meanings, but also of aesthetics, processes, and events. As a substance of these cultural products, what I call the syncretos, are not taken as a product of not just one, but the amalgamation of various cultural traditions and thought systems. The thinking of the art object as inherently syncretic needs to be taken as an open gesture towards universality, which is something that is constantly spoken about. When one reads the history of art, or the universal history of art is rarely universal. So all of these have multiple readings, multiple interpretations, and all of these various narratives are embraced as a net of meanings, as well as physical properties that are the signs related to materials, to techniques, to their looks and their history. So to achieve a complex yet holistic approach to art making and curating simultaneously.
Thank you.